Hello, this is Dr. D, and today we are going to talk about cardiovascular system. What does the cardiovascular system include? Heart, blood vessels, and blood. All right, when we talk about blood, we depend upon blood for what? Nutrients, oxygen, waste removal, instructions, right? Like hormones and other communicators. What are the functions of blood? Got to know this. Transportation of dissolved gases, nutrients, hormones, waste, regulation of pH, ion composition, restriction of fluid losses by clotting, defense against toxins and pathogens, and stabilization of body temperature. So blood is a type of connective tissue. What's a connective tissue? A connective tissue will have cells which have intercellular spaces, and this space is made up of a matrix, is filled with a matrix. All right, now blood is a special kind of connective tissue. Why? Yes, it has cells, but the matrix is a liquid, and that matrix is called plasma. All right, when you spin the red blood cells, you will see 45% of it will form the red blood cells, and this is called the hematocrit. Less than 1% is the buffy coat, and most of it is the plasma. So when we say hematocrit, it refers to what? Red blood cells. All right. The cells and the platelets are called formed elements. Of the formed elements, 99.9% is the red blood cells. Only 0.1% is the white blood cells and the platelets. Hematopoiesis first starts off in the yolk sac. So what is hematopoiesis? Formation of the blood cells. Later on, these stem cells move to the spleen, liver, lymph nodes, where they produce what? Blood cells. Once bone marrow develops, the red bone marrow, it forms most of the blood cells. All right. In children, hematopoiesis, again, what's hematopoiesis? Formation of blood cells occurs in the marrow of long bones. But in adults, remember, the red bone marrow in the hollow cavity, in the medullary cavity of the long bones, is replaced by what? Yellow bone marrow. So where does hematopoiesis occur? Pelvis, cranium, vertebrae, sternum, and at the end of long bones where there's spongy bone, and the spongy bone contains what? If you remember your 201, red bone marrow. Blood cell development starts with hemocytoblast. Hemocytoblast forms two types of cells, myeloid cell and lymphoid cell. The myeloid cell will form all the cells. The lymphoid cell will form what? The lymph cells. So the myeloid cell will form the RBCs, the platelets, and the rest of the white blood cells. The lymphoid cell will form also the white blood cells, the B and T cells. All right. So we are going to focus on what for now? On the erythrocytes, which are about 99% of the blood cells. So there's more of the number in adult male and less in adult female. All right. Again, it depends upon your diet. Let's look at the red blood cells. They are small, they are biconcave discs, and the main function is transport what? Gases. So the shape allows large surface area for gas exchange, allows stacking, and makes the cells very, very flexible. What do they contain? Why are they red? They contain a pigment, and this pigment is called hemoglobin. So hemoglobin has protein and which contains iron and binds to oxygen. So the biconcave shape places hemoglobin molecules near the cell surface. What is the most important characteristic of the mature RBC in humans? It lacks nuclei and lacks organelles. What are organelles? Like, for example, mitochondria. Like, for example, our Golgi bodies. All right. So here there are these other organelles. It lacks all the organelles. It only has what? Hemoglobin. All right, let's look at the hemoglobin. Hemoglobin structure is made up of 4 heme units. This is a heme unit. A heme unit has a ring, and this ring is called porphyrin ring. This ring has an iron in the middle. One hemoglobin has how many hemes? 4. Each heme binds to oxygen. Each heme is also has a globin chain, a polypeptide chain called the globin chain. So globin is the protein. Heme part is the ring with the iron. All right, so the heme plus globin makes hemoglobin. Heme carries oxygen. Globin carries carbon dioxide. One hemoglobin has 4 heme units, therefore can carry 4 oxygen. One hemoglobin has 4 globin chains and therefore can carry 4 carbon dioxide. Oxyhemoglobin is oxygen bound, bright red. Deoxyhemoglobin, when no oxygen is bound, and it is dark red or burgundy in color. All right. So here when it binds to when oxygen is low and carbon dioxide is bound, we call it carbahemoglobin. Sickle cell anemia is a genetic disorder. And this is because a single amino acid in the globin chain is substituted. All right. So here the RBC is normal when oxygen is bound. This is important. Got to know this. But when the RBC loses oxygen, deoxyhemoglobin, the RBC will become sickle shape. So what will it do now? It will aggregate. It will clog capillaries. All right. Reduce the oxygen to the tissues. So the red blood cell formation starts off with hemocytoblast, which forms the myeloid cell. You have to know this, all right? So here proerythroblast, erythroblast, normoblast, reticulocyte, erythrocyte. Now, the normoblast, you should remember normal, right? It contains what? Nucleus and organelles. By the time it becomes a reticulocyte, it has ejected the organelles as well as nucleus. It has few endoplasmic reticulum. That's why it's called reticulocyte. And at this stage, the cell will come out of the red bone marrow into the blood circulation and will form, of course, mature into the mature erythrocyte. The entire process is driven by certain colony stimulating factors. We'll talk about that in the next slide. So what's the homeostatic control? Whenever there is low oxygen being delivered to the tissues, the liver and kidney will produce a hormone, and this is called erythropoietin. Erythropoietin will stimulate what? It will stimulate more and more of hemocytoblast to form erythrocyte. Remember, hemocyte has the option to form myeloid or lymphoid, but only when there is low oxygen going to the tissues and liver and kidney are producing what? Erythropoietin, the hormone. Will it stimulate the hemocytoblast, the stem cell, to produce erythrocyte? So now when there's more erythrocyte, obviously erythrocytes have what? Hemoglobin. Therefore, now hemoglobin can carry oxygen to the tissues and the tissues are no longer starved. What are the dietary impacts? You absolutely need B12 and folic acid. For what? DNA synthesis. If B12 and folic acid is low, you will be anemic. Why? Let's look. For a myeloblast to form erythrocyte, therefore what you need is cell duplication. Yes, cell duplication means what? DNA duplication. For DNA duplication, what do we need? What did I just say? We need B12 and folic acid. Those who are vegetarian will automatically have low B12 unless they take proper nutrients or supplements, and they will be anemic. So if you are a vegetarian, you need to take extra B12. All right. B12 also is absorbed with the help of intrinsic factor produced from the stomach. Some people who do not produce intrinsic factor will not absorb B12 and therefore will be anemic. Iron is absolutely needed, absorbed in the small intestine. It's absolutely needed to produce hemoglobin. If you remember, the heme part has a ring, remember? And the ring is held together by what? Iron. So if you don't have iron, will you have heme? No. And therefore, will you have hemoglobin? Answer is no. Anemia. There are different types of anemia. You have to know all of them. Aplastic is there's because of damaged bone marrow. Why? Because of radiation or toxic chemicals. Hemolytic is what happens is the red blood cells are destroyed. Now, red blood cells have a lifespan of 120 days. All right. But if you are going to take toxic chemicals, especially if those who are take drugs, knowingly or unknowingly, they are going to destroy the red blood cells. All right. Iron deficiency anemia, of course, because they lack dietary iron and they're hemoglobin deficient. Pernicious anemia is because they do not absorb B12, lack of intrinsic factor. So they have immature RBC. Sickle cell anemia, we talked about that, is defective gene. Thalassemia is also defective gene, but now the RBC is hemoglobin deficient and red blood cells are going to be very short-lived. All right, breakdown. So the breakdown, the red blood cells have a lifespan of what? What did I say? 120 days. Damaged RBC are ruptured in the spleen and liver. In fact, the spleen is called the graveyard of the RBC. So the macrophage phagocytize damaged RBC and break down their contents. Hemoglobin, how is it broken down? The protein chain is easy, broken down into amino acids. Iron is bound to carrier protein, forms transferrin, transported in the bloodstream, taken to the liver and stored in the form of ferritin. The heme group breaks down into the bile salts. What are the bile salts? Biliverdin and bilirubin. These are the bile pigments, bilirubin and biliverdin. All right. All right. So with this, we come to the end of the RBC part. I will continue the rest in the next presentation. I thank you for listening to me. If there are questions or concerns, please do come and see me. Thank you.